talking about dealing with BDS in the academic community. And to help discuss this, we actually have three members of the academic community here. First of all, we have Roberta Seid, who is a historian who was taught at University of Southern California and UC Irvine. She is the Education and Research Director for Stand With Us. And has published books and articles both in the scholarly and popular press. We also have Dr. Sam Edelman, who is the director of the academic network of the Israel On Campus Coalition. He has also served as executive director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, and he is an emeritus professor at California State University at Chico in Jewish, Israel, and Holocaust Studies. And we also have Dr. Peggy Shapiro, who is the Midwest director at Stand With Us, and also emeritus professor at City Colleges of Chicago, where she taught foreign languages. She was chair of the foreign languages ESL department and professor for 31 years. And both Sam and Peggy are members of the Modern Language Association, which we will discuss in detail a little bit further into the program. So, Roberta, I'd like to start with you for the benefit of people who may not have been on the first several, just to review briefly history and goals of BDS, and specifically history of previous attempts at academic boycotts against Israel.
Well, what is BDS? It's actually an international propaganda campaign to delegitimize and demonize Israel. And what is its goal? Its goal is to erode support for the Jewish state, isolate it, and turn it into the pariah of nations, the apartheid South Africa treatment, especially to do that in the United States. And BDS campaigns in corporations, businesses, churches, unions, among performing artists and professional associations, and especially it targets campuses to infect the younger generation with anti-Israel, anti-Zionist views. And their hope is to get the international community to agree that Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state, and it should be dismantled, eliminated. And you can see that in the three central planks of the BDS movement. One is to end the occupation, but they're very vague about whether they mean Israel out of the West Bank, or for some of them, the extremists, they believe that all of Israel is occupied territory. Secondly, they demand equal rights for Palestinians in Israel, and often this means separatism, a separatist movement. But third, they call for a right of return. That is, that the over 5 million Palestinian refugees of the 1948 war and their descendants should have a right to move to Israel, which would turn Jews into a minority in their own state and effectively eliminate the Jewish state. Since 1949, the right of return has been used as a euphemism for destroying Israel. What are the techniques that BDS uses? They cloak or disguise their demands in the rhetoric of human rights, social justice, and international law. When they bring divestment resolutions to campus, for example, they don't care if they win or lose, because their main goal is to force debate on their terms about how heinous Israel is. They falsely claim that Israel is the worst violators of these principles of human rights and international law. And in the process, and what is a great danger, is they pervert those values beyond recognition because they misapply them. Now, BDS is not new. They would have you believe that they're following the South African anti-apartheid model. But in fact, BDS has been a weapon used by Arab leaders against Israel since the 1920s. And that's clear evidence that the issue is not what Israel does, but the fact that it is. Arabs mandate Palestine implemented boycotts against the Jewish community in the 1920s, and especially in the 1930s when they collaborated with Hitler and brought Nazi-style boycotts into the mandate. In 1945, before Israel was even a state, States, the Arab League implemented blanket, stringent boycotts against pre-state Israel and then reinforced them in 1948 after Israel became a state. These included economic, cultural, diplomatic boycotts. Of course, that would also include academic boycotts. And those are still in place today, though they relaxed slightly during the Oslo process. But the recent BDS movement got its steam in 2001 at the UN Durban Conference against racism, which turned into an anti-Semitic hate fest. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, Palestinians, and Arab states led the charge, falsely accusing Israel of apartheid and other crimes. They actually carried signs that Hitler should have finished the job. But even that, which began in 2001, didn't get that much traction. It wasn't until 2005 when Omar Barghouti, Palestinian from Kuwait and America, co-founded the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement. And this movement uses a new style. They have an academic veneer. They use polished language, the polished language of human rights and social justice, to what I would argue modernize the old purpose so that it would appeal to progressives, to liberals. And what they're really trying to do is to export the Arab world's hatred of Israel's existence to the West. Now, in general, the BDS movement has not had much success, but it is beginning to make inroads. It's changing the discourse, the mainstream discourse and conversation about Israel.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a really, really great summary. And I think it's
add one thing to what Roberta said.
Please go right ahead.
Quickly, the major lesson, one of the major lessons that we need to learn from the Nazi boycott that was joined by the Arabs in the 1930s, is that what led up to that was a campaign by Julius Streicher against the Jewish community in Germany. And he said outrageous things about Jews in Germany and the Jewish community, and was sued some 11 times by the Jewish community and lost every suit. And every time Streicher lost, he laughed, paid the fine, and said, something always sticks. So what Roberta has said is very important. We need to understand that the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement as it currently exists does not care about really boycotting or divesting from Israel. They only care about saying the most outrageous things about Israel to delegitimize it and to undercut its ability to defend itself and to undercut the stateness of Israel. In part because what they want to try to do is change the opinions of young Americans. That's their goal. Their goal is not, and I've researched all their conferences and everything they've said, and on all their documents, and primarily, they say over and over again, we don't have to win a boycott, divestment, and sanctions initiative. We win by causing people to question Israel's right to exist.
And by forcing the terms of the debate.
Exactly.
So that you are forced to debate about whether or not Israel is a human rights abuser and so on.
And on top of what else Roberta said, they've captured Israel's own narrative and used it against it. Mm-hmm. And by using Israel's own narrative against it, they have made what is one of the most important human rights supportive nations in the world into the opposite. What is up is down for the BDS movement. What is black is white. What is the sun? When the sun is up, they say it's the moon. They have turned the world upside down. Their world view is based on fantasy, mythology, propaganda, and outright lying.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you see the historical trend here. In a certain way, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Peggy, would you like to talk a little bit about just the more current efforts in terms of academic boycotts and what we've seen in the recent decade or so?
Yeah, I'd like to be specific about one I went to, and that's the MLA conference, the Modern Language Association. So before there was a resolution, they had a panel. It was called Academic Boycotts, a Conversation about Israel and Palestine. And what I saw there and heard violated every value we hold dear as American and as academics. It was kind of to warm up the members to vote against Israel. So here's what they did. They presented a panel where there was no conversation. All the presenters were on record for their animus and activism against Israel. There was no diversity of opinion admitted. There was no room for critical thinking. The moderator was Samir Ali, and he started out as moderator by calling Israel racist. The panel included the aforementioned Omar Barghouti, who advocates for boycott of Israeli academic institutions, even though he's a graduate student at Tel Aviv University. I wasn't sure.
Employed by Tel Aviv.
Yeah, and to boycott it, I'm not sure if he advocates boycotting himself, since he is part of Israeli academia. There was Professor Barbara Jean Harlow, and she called against Israel for crimes against humanity. And when somebody got up and asked her, why Israel? Why are you singling out the only democracy in the Middle East? She said, and this requires a lot of academic excellence, why not? That kind of reason would not have had a passing grade on a freshman term paper. And it kind of reminded me of a response by the outgoing president of the ASA, Curtis Marez. And they asked him, why are you picking on the one Jewish state amid 22 Arab nations? And he said, well, one has to start somewhere. Stunning. These are professors. And one who wasn't so on board with boycotting was Richard Ullman. And he said, because boycotting of Israel is insufficient punishment. They went on, David Lloyd, professor at the University of California, Irvine, called Israel brutal, Gaza an open-air prison. They said Israel's morally schizophrenic, racist, colonizers, apartheid, pillages and destroys Palestinians. And what proof did they offer for all this? Absolutely nothing. And Professor Lloyd went so far as to say, Israel's, and I heard it with my own ears, Israel's detractors need no defense, since Israel's guilt is a matter of record. So Israel's guilty a priori. We don't need to look into it. This is terrible for anyone to say, but for academics, it's sort of a crime against scholarship. And all of them had in common a blindness. They were able to distort the reality on the ground and to see only what fit their BDS agenda. They could see the checkpoints, the separation wall, the raids, the home demolitions, but they don't see the victims of terror. They don't see the children that I saw who play in fortified playgrounds and always have an ear open for alarm, which gives them 15 seconds to find shelter when a rocket's going to hit them. They speak about the Palestinian connection to the land, which is fine, but they refuse to look at over 3,000 years of Jewish ties. And in fact, these same professors want to stop the archaeological digs, the academic exploration, because every time you stick a shovel in the ground, you find a piece of Jewish history. And what was really alarming is how they don't mind undermining long-held values of academic freedom. Now, one of the central tenets, they claim it's the boycott of Israeli universities, institutions, and not individuals. Yet at his presentation in the Modern Language Association, Barghouti conceded that, yes, individual faculty members would pay a price in the academic boycott, but he just said the price was worth it. And they have they are undermining what, as American academics, we have long argued against and long held the belief that we won't discriminate against nationality or ethnicity or racism. We would never have a discussion on which Arab or Muslim universities to boycott because we know that that's blatant bigotry. Well, it's also bigotry when it is Jews and Israel. But even if Israel and the life of the death of millions of people were not the issue, there's a problem of the hypocrisy, the shoddy scholarship, the destruction not only of Israel, but of our academic system. And parents are paying $30,000 or more for their children to be indoctrinated rather than educated. And so this was all the prelude to what happened before the resolutions came. And there were two resolutions. One, asking the State Department to pressure Israel to stop its arbitrary denial of entry into Gaza and the West Bank. And I stress those words. And it called for Israel not to have control of its own borders. The other resolution called for support of the ASA boycotters. Well, these people who put this out, I know that Sam can talk more about it, they didn't look at the basic facts that were Sam organized and presenting there. And that, in fact, access to Gaza was not through Israel, but through Egypt, and that the visa regulations were not arbitrary, but part of any democracy's visa regulations. So what did they do? How did they protect these poor academics who can't get into Gaza? Did they care about the Palestinians who couldn't get into Gaza? No, they just deleted Gaza and arbitrary from the resolution. So the goal was not in any way to enhance Palestinian opportunity for education, but the goal was clearly only to punish Israel. Israel and the Palestinians have a lot of under the radar cooperation, and it would really, any kind of boycott would hurt Palestinian educators as much or more than Israelis. But one thing that really got to me is that there was only one side allowed the opportunity to present evidence. The delegates received packets online and in their hands to talk about a resolution to pressure Israel into a dangerous situation. And what information were they given in their packets? Only the anti-Israel. The people who wanted to speak up were given 3 minutes, and sometimes that 3 minutes was cut. It became a sideshow. I was one of the very few who had the opportunity to have my 3 minutes. Scholars who deserved it much more were not given the opportunity. It was a chaotic event. And I said this at the MLA conference. And I asked the delegates, look at your packets you received. Not for what's in it, but for what's not in it. There's no understanding, no context, no explanation of Israel's defense needs. And the opponents of the resolution are given only 2 minutes to 3 minutes to unwind a tangled web of misinformation, unsubstantiated anecdotes, which are presented in no context. And I talked about the removal of the word Gaza and arbitrary. What else didn't they tell in these packets? One of the things that they had on the website is that there's a State Department warning not to travel to Israel. Misinformation. It was that the State Department about not visiting Gaza because it's run by a terrorist organization. So the bias, the lack of research, the incompetence, the hypocrisy were really extremely disturbing.
Yeah, and as we talked about in previous the previous shows that we had done, it's the same tactics BDS uses in other settings: lack of context, misinformation. Sam, before I get to you to actually talk more about how these specific academic groups became the target for BDS, I would like to point out to those of you who are in the room. There is a small box up at the top right of your screen that says donate. And if you appreciate the work that we're doing here to talk about and spread the word about what BDS is about, and want to support Stand With Us as a whole in its Israel education efforts, please feel free to donate, and any donations are appreciated. So, Sam, you were at the MLA as well, and certainly want to hear, what you did there. But also, why is it that these particular groups become the target of BDS efforts? How does this come to pass?
Well, let's be clear. The vast majority of college professors, of institutions, and of professional organizations are never going to boycott Israel, never going to divest from Israel, and never going to be involved in any kind of these sanctions. The science, technology, engineering, medical fields, business, and law are, for the most part, so involved with and understand Israel from a much different perspective. The real problem areas are the faculties in the humanities, the liberal arts, the social sciences, and the arts. And not all faculty in those areas, only in a few disciplines. So when we look at the larger university, we're only talking about a tiny minority in a very small part of academia that happens to be, unfortunately, for that those disciplines in decline rather than growing. So let's frame this in a way, in a larger picture. Second, those professional organizations that have been involved in either sanctioning or boycotting of Israel are up until MLA were marginal organizations.
Yeah.
The American Asian Studies Organization is minuscule and full of ideologues, mostly from the left, who and there are almost no either Jewish or pro-Israel faculty in those disciplines who were able to speak out in any of those venues. The even smaller Native American group, which is hardly representative of any kind of academic world, let alone the Native American ethnic groups in the United States, clearly is marginal. But when it comes to the American Studies Association, it was a larger organization. It had been founded by Jewish scholars. It had been involved with American Jewish studies for some time. But as Jewish studies became more and more powerful in the United States, more and more Jewish faculty left American studies to go over to Jewish studies. And also many American studies faculty found their own organization moving more and more toward an attack on America as a colonialist, imperialist, this postmodern, some of this postmodern stuff, and rebelled against it and left. So we had less people in the American studies than we had ever had who understood the situation in the Middle East. And so there was no voices in opposition, except for a few members who were either on the board and fought against it, or members who were angry about what was going on and tried to speak out. And the Jewish community generally did not take American studies as seriously as it should have. So there's no countervening arguments being made in American studies. So when MLA happened, it was clear that we had a problem. American Studies has 3,000 members. MLA is like, what, Peggy, am I correct?
28,000.
28,000. That's a lot of people. It is one of the oldest of the professional organizations. It's a very important organization. So any kind of anti-Israel activity in the MLA would be very, very bad. And the MLA has done this before. The MLA has attempted boycott and sanctions of Israel before. Edward Said, the famous Palestinian writer and theorist who came up with this post-colonial stuff, was the president of the MLA. So the MLA already had done this, but they had defeated previous attempts at boycotting. So this proposal that was brought forth, as Peggy quite nicely outlined, to attack Israel for allegedly violating the rights of academics to enter into the West Bank, which was patently ridiculous, and she outlined it very well. A number of us, decided that we had been silent in ASA, we could not be silent in MLA, and since we were so late to the table, we tried to get a panel in, and they refused us, and so we created an alternative panel, held it in a hotel next door, and had as many faculty come over to that as came to the Barghouti pro BDS panel. If we had not done that, we would not have gotten the arguments out attacking the resolution, and also attacking what we thought was going to happen, an emergency resolution supporting the ASA boycott. So what we did, we had the past president of the AAUP, one of the largest academic unions in the United States, Kerry Nelson. We had one of the past presidents of the MLA himself, Russell Berman. We had an MLA member, Gabriel Brom, and we brought in an Israeli expert, Ilan Troen, who heads up the Schusterman Israel Studies Center in Brandeis University, to speak. And in a really quite an amazing session, we eviscerated every argument that they made and all their accusations, and showed in depth how what they were saying was not true, was lacked critical thinking, and was illogical and irrational. So I think this helped in a way to change the legislation that was eventually passed by a very narrow margin. Only a few votes passed the anti-Israel resolution, and the support of the boycott was completely defeated. So the situation we're confronting now is that the MLA has just announced a vote of all of its members to take place from now until June 1st to vote on the anti-Israel resolution about borders. In essence, what they're saying to the Israeli government is the right of every other nation in the world to safeguard their borders by asking people to have visas and asking people to go through border security cannot be done by Israel. That's what they're saying. That's essentially what they're doing. It's patently ridiculous on all points. They took, as Peggy quite rightly noted, out the Gaza part because they did not want to say the same thing to Egypt, which was blockading and is blockading Gaza as we speak. So the resolution is patently ridiculous, and we need to encourage, and I ask your audience to find out every member of MLA they can, we need to encourage MLA members to vote against this resolution. And I also encourage you to join MLA in the next few weeks. You have to do it immediately, this next week or two, so that you can vote on this. Go ahead, join them, vote, make your statement known. What this has said to us is that we have a real possibility of going head-to-head with Omar Barghouti and David Lloyd and all the others who support the boycott if we try. The panel that we put together for MLA was an amazing moment. It showed that we can get in their face and make them sweat and make them understand that there is an alternative out there. And we need to be doing that with other professional organizations out there. There are not a lot of professional organizations left who are going to be willing to talk about, let alone vote on boycott, divestment, and sanctions, in part because a response to the American Studies boycott has been an amazing response by more than 220 university presidents, by state legislatures, by the op-eds in every major newspaper in the United States, roundly condemning this kind of act on the part of the ASA and making ASA the pariah professional organization. We know that this is having an effect on ASA. ASA is riven now with splits and conflict. The regional organizations of ASA are suing to leave the organization because they are embarrassed by the national organization. And who knows what's going to happen from there.
Yeah, Sam,
So-
I want to interrupt on that for just a moment and point out for those people who weren't aware of it that after the American Studies Association took this vote, again, in the same spirit of very limited debate, one-sided information, they only sent out to their members arguments of one side of the argument. And again, now you see the discord that's been left there in the wake of several hundred institutions of higher learning in the United States very, very quickly condemning this. This is a phenomenon that's been seen where BDS goes onto student organizations, goes into communities. And I want to give a shout out and a plug here to a phenomenal blog that chronicles this very, very well called Divest This. It's at divestthis.com. John Haber, who does that blog, is in the room now. And he does a great job of chronicling the effects of BDS on organizations. And what you saw from ASA is that it really isn't any different than at your community food co-op or student government organization, the discord and the disarray that it leaves in its wake. Sorry for interrupting, Sam, please.
Yeah,
Okay, let me just finish and then.
Okay, I want to add a point of
Okay,
perspective.
let me just finish and say one last thing. Part of our problem, though, is that we are responding to BDS rather than actively taking over the message. Every time we respond to a BDS accusation, we are restating that accusation and cementing it in the minds of the public. Remember what I said earlier. The goal of BDS is not BDS. The goal of BDS is to change American opinions. We have got to come out with our message and get them to start responding to it. And our message cannot be a repeat of their message. So it's critical, absolutely critical, that we not respond directly to the BDS people, but come out with what we have to say, which is important, about academic freedom, about human rights in the Middle East, about the kind of democracy that Israel is the role model for the rest of the world. The more that we can do these kinds of things and send our message out, the more we can put them on the defensive. And finally, English professors who are modern language professors and American studies professors are supposed to be critical thinkers. If we can also show the rest of the world that they are not critical thinkers and therefore have lost the reason for teaching our young men and women, I think that is also an important thing. We need to call them out not on their boycott, divestment, and sanctions or their anti-Israel activities. We need to call them out on their lying, half-truths, fantasy mythology world based on nothing other than their mere opinion. And we need to go after their lack of critical thinking.
I just want to add one thing here. When I looked at the supporting materials, just as through the eyes of not someone who's for Israel, but just what they had were 5 anecdotes, 4 of which were easily disproved. Out of thousands of people who want to enter, one person who had an issue. The other 4 all got into a study. And this was the sum total of their research. Why are they teaching our children? What are our students learning from them?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I was pretty closely involved in the American Studies Association, the fight against the boycott resolution, and I dissected their resolution, and you found the same thing, just misstatements of fact, false arguments, and so on. It's online if anybody wants to read the rebuttal. But I also wanted to make 2 clarifications and add one point. The clarification is that the American Studies Association did pass an academic boycott of Israel. The MLA was not considering an academic boycott of Israel. It was just sort of taking pot shots at Israel, claiming that they didn't handle their visas properly, were discriminatory. I want to stress again that the ASA, American Studies Association, academic boycott of Israel was really a revolutionary kind of statement for them to make, because academics and academic associations, the academic community, had been firmly opposed to any academic boycotts. In fact, the American Association of University Professors opposed an academic boycott of apartheid South Africa, a country about whom there was very little dispute that boycotts were wrong. So the BDS people crossed a dramatic red line, and as Sam pointed out, there was a tremendous outcry against this, and yet they are defending themselves. And this is what we run into a lot, by saying, oh, these organizations, the AAUP, the university presidents, are trying to deprive us of our academic freedom because they disagree with our academic boycott. And this is the kind of circular reasoning we run into a lot. It's very hard to fight that. But the final thing I want to make, and I think it's extremely important, and Sam was right to say that it's limited to social science and humanities departments and some arts departments for the most part. But the American society puts professors on a pedestal. They're considered to have extra information, more deeper knowledge than others, and somehow some kind of moral superiority by which they can judge. And that makes it difficult when our students are at college, are in school, and they have professors like the ones who led these anti-Israel resolutions, and as we've just heard how false they were. This is extremely disturbing because they will infect the younger generation that comes up. So it's not just that the associations pass these anti-Israel resolutions. It's really important for us to expose the logic, illogic, and the total corruption of academic standards that these professors are trying to spread in our schools. So that is a danger.
But we also need to remember that there are some organizations who are supporting BDS. Radical labor unions are supporting it and giving money to the BDS movement. Jewish Voice for Peace is one of the major supporters of the boycott, divestments, and sanctions movement, and have been supplying a number of quote-unquote Jewish speakers in favor of boycotting and divestment and sanctions, as well as the American Friends. The Quakers have been involved in supporting it. The Quakers and Jewish Voice for Peace run a camp in the summer to train college students on how to do boycott, investment, sanctions activities on campus. We need to out them. We need to let people know who they are, what they're doing, and when they're doing it. Also, part of our problem is that most faculty are completely ignorant about the Middle East and about the Arab. That means we need to find ways to bring a wide range of different discipline-based groups of faculty to Israel to see Israel firsthand, to meet Israelis, to talk with them, to even meet Palestinians and hear their side. But to have people go en masse to Israel, like a birthright-like trip that we do for Jewish students, do it for faculty. And we will see a change in these kinds of activities with professional organizations.
You know,
organizations, ASA, the American Asians, even MLA, it started with trips supported by Palestinian supporters of faculty to Gaza and the West Bank. And that created a core of faculty who would then come back and push these things. We're not doing that with our own faculty across the United States. We need to be doing that.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I want to pick up on an important point, Sam, that you made. And the small percentage of faculty who are pushing for BDS. And the rest of them are apathetic, uninformed, don't care. And this is an issue where silence is not an option.
Right.
Silence, in fact, is condoning this
absolutely right.
anti-Semitic, bigoted, approach to Israel. The same people who are silent on this would not be silent on any other kind of bigotry. If we were to have a conference hailing the wonderful values of being Islamophobic, these faculty would be outraged and speak up, because of course it would be terrible. It's racist, it's bigoted. So we have to seize the moment. We need to speak up and not think that someone else is going to do it. We need to speak up for peace, because the bigotry and the one-sidedness, the goal is not peace, it's destruction of Israel. And I think that departments who co-sponsor BDS events should be challenged on this. Would you sponsor an event that is anti-Catholic, anti-Hindu, anti-Muslim? It would be outrageous, ridiculous. Well, if it doesn't make sense for other groups, then why are you doing it against the only Jewish state? And I think there's a serious, serious lack of information, and we have to remedy to that.
I agree with what you've said,
yeah.
Peggy. I think that you're absolutely correct. We need to be speaking out more forcefully, and we need to encourage those who are not part of either the Jewish community or the pro-Israel community to also speak out in cases where academic freedom is really being abridged. It's not being abridged by those who support Israel's side. In fact, it's being abridged by the other side. Just recently, last week, we saw a video in Galway of a group of students shouting down Alan Johnson, who is not Jewish and a very important Middle East studies scholars, because he was talking in positively about Israel. They shouted him down. That's an abridgment of academic freedom.
And how about in England, where BDS had a longer and stronger foothold in academia? Now they are not. There have been many instances where they haven't hired faculty.
Yes.
Only because of their connection with Israel. Any place else you'd call that discrimination.
I'd like to add, though, a more positive note. We've been at StandWithUs involved with fighting the BDS movement literally since 2002, when they started trying to get academic boycotts that failed miserably at that time. But the good thing is that we have found in the past that not many people got very concerned about this movement that we saw as dangerous and growing. And since the ASA resolution, we're finding marvelous faculty coming out of the woodwork and realizing that this is really a problem that they're going to have to address.
Absolutely.
So very often the very push provokes a response that wakes people up. So that's one good thing that we should all remember.
And I think that if you're...
One additional thing I'd like to bring up as well. The Israel on Campus Coalition that I've been working with since I left SBME 2 years ago has created a national faculty network, and Roberta is one of our faculty fellows. Currently, we're on 33 universities with 43 faculty, and hopefully by June we'll double in size. The national network, in part, is there to help faculty more effectively speak out and more effectively argue against these boycott, divestment, and sanctions efforts. So this is one of the long-term solutions that we have to BDS, is to create this national faculty network that's going to be an infrastructure in place long after BDS goes away. A part of our problem was that we had structures like this up through Oslo, but we let them go after the Oslo Peace Accords ushered in supposedly peace, and we stopped funding them. So now we're working hard to restart them, and that's what we're doing now. This is one of the long-term solutions, and working with StandWithUs and other organizations that are involved on campus, it's critical that we coordinate, and which we do. Coordinate, work together, and find ways in which we can effectively move away from responding to these allegations having them respond to us?
I think that that's so important. And if for educators, I think it's important to value education and to know something about the facts. That's what we work on and Stand With Us for sort of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And educators need to know the reality of Israel-Arab academia. Do they know that 22% of all medical students in Israel are Arabs? And that includes about 700 Arabic Bedouins. They study at Ben Gurion University. Technion just launched its first massive online open course in Arabic. It's a course on nanotechnology and nanosensors. And this is the first ever. Is this what you want to boycott? University of Haifa, where my family lives. There are 5 active Palestinian organizations on campus, and they regularly protest, and they have the freedom to do whatever they want. And you have a Department of Arabic Language and Literature that is about as good as any that you're going to find in the world. So when you're talking about boycotting Israel academia, at least have some knowledge about what the reality is. And I think Alan Dershowitz challenged these BDS boycott academics at the ASA, and he asked them to name a single country in the history of the world that was faced with the challenges that Israel has, that has a better human rights record, higher degree of compliance with the rule of law, more demanding judiciary, and more educational opportunity. And how has the ASA or the MLA or any of the other groups who are considering anti-Israel resolutions, not a single member of any of the associations came up with a single country that's doing a better job than Israel. And I think we need to lay down that gauntlet.
I agree.
Well said.
So we seem to have lost our moderator.
We lost our moderator, but I'm not sure how to ask for questions. But I wanted to, as long as we have a little time to say, there are some other ways. People listening to this can say, well, what can I do? I'm just sitting here. Well, as an individual, you could first of all educate yourself so that you're aware. But there are other ways. There are some legal remedies that people are looking at. Larry Summers, he was the president of Harvard, and said, my hope would be that responsible university leaders would become very reluctant to see their university funds used to finance faculty memberships of faculty travel to associations that are not scholarly, but more of a political tool. Remember, universities are 501c3s. They're not there for political activism. We have had laws in the U.S. against illegal boycotts. When the Arab League had a boycott of Israel, we had laws in place for that. And everyone has the freedom to speak, but they don't necessarily have the freedom maybe to be financed. We have to see if a well-crafted piece of legislation could deal with that. But there are also economic issues. People are giving to their university. Well, if their university was in favor of slavery or Islamophobia or so forth, they would reconsider their contributions. Well, if they're anti-Semitic in their outlook, you may want to look at it the same way. And they just had news that University of Windsor passed a terrible anti-Israel resolution. And there was one company, Spencer Associates Consulting Engineering, and they had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to University of Windsor, and they were accepting student interns for 20 years. They said, well, we're not going to do that anymore. That doesn't...
I might just add to that, Peggy, that they just had their student senate elections at the University of Windsor for the board of the student government. Nobody was reelected. And in fact, nobody's going to serve because there weren't even opponents competing for the seats. They just said, do not approve. Students did, do not approve. So they got voted out of office at the University of Windsor, which is interesting.
So that's really the democratic way. You can vote. The students can run for office. The faculty on in these associations can take part, speak up, vote, run to be a delegate. As I said before, silence is consent. It's time to speak up.
And let me add that if you have faculty that you know of who are supportive of Israel on campuses that you reside on, send their names to me, and I'll contact them, and we'll get them involved with the national network. As I said, we're trying to double the number of universities and the number of faculty by this summer, which is important. I think that if you have questions specifically, put them in the chat room, and we'll try to look at them real quickly so that we can respond.
I just wanted to add one other thing for people who are listening who may not be directly involved in academia. There are things you can do as well. Educate your friends. Educate your community. Most people have children or grandchildren or relatives who are in college. Make sure that people are aware, that those people are aware of what the problem is and the challenge that we're facing, and just spread the word around. Advise your kids who are starting college about this problem and tell them to be alerted to it and to not feel shy, which many of the students do, about perhaps challenging professors who present this kind of material in the classroom. If there is a problem, you can contact StandWithUs, and we will be happy to help the students work through it. But we gotta get a grassroots movement going against this kind of betrayal by the academics on methodology and on specifically Israel.
I think that education is the first step because people are empowered when they have some information. If they feel something's wrong but they don't know what to say or how to say it, they'll be silent. So it's a fairly simple thing to do, and I'm not plugging anything because at StandWithUs you can download our materials for free. So we're not talking about any expense, but at least get the facts so that you can speak up, and don't accept statements about Israel that you wouldn't accept about any other group. Substitute that proper noun, and if you put in any other group and it sounds wrong, then know that that is anti-Semitism. So I don't know if there are any. Sam, I'm going to let you seem the most technologically astute here. Do you see any questions?
I'm going through, but I don't. It's a long one.
I'm not seeing any questions either.
They're conversing with one another.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I don't.
Okay, there was a question about Israeli academics who are supportive of boycott. I mean,
it's a good
I think it's great. I think it's great because it shows you the diversity of thought that you have in Israel. If we had that same kind of openness and freedom of discussion on the other side, we'd be sitting, there wouldn't be another side, we'd be sitting in peaceful relationships. Israel has every range of opinion and allows it. I don't have to agree with it, but I love that about Israel.
And I might add one other thing, is that the few professors from Israel, the faculty who are for BDS or anti-Zionists, get a lot of coverage. They are featured and showcased and highlighted, so it looks like there are many more of them than there are.
And Roberta is absolutely correct. They're a very tiny minority, and mostly from the extreme left. And there was a question from one person about.
Can I just say one more thing about that? You know
Yeah.
who's not for BDS? Who opposes academic BDS? Mahmoud Abbas. Because he
Right.
came out against it because he knows it hurts the Palestinian people.
So there was a question about, someone said, I'm extremely concerned about Jewish groups that support BDS. Yeah, I mean, look, they too represent a very tiny minority in the Jewish community. Just like the Natura Carta represents, like, it's a couple of hundred people. Yet they're the face that we see of the Orthodox community, the ultra-Orthodox community. I'm going to say something radical here, even though it's going on YouTube. This is a kind of Jew washing. These are a small, tiny minority put up by these various groups. Oh, here we have our Jew who is going to support what we're saying. But and Jewish Voice for Peace, very frankly, has their group of rabbis, and they have their entertainment industry spokespeople, and they have their budget is in excess of more than $1 million. Yet they are an invidious group that is calling for literally the dismantling of the Jewish state. Why should we listen to them? We should point out over and over again that these people are not representative, and it doesn't matter anyway. The Jewish community in Israel and in the United States is a pluralistic, democratic community, and we have voices on all sides. This is not the same in the Palestinian side, where any kind of dissent is attacked and imprisoned or outright assassinated, either physically or verbally, a verbal kind of assassination that takes place, an ostracism. So we need to worry about our own innate Jewish community's willingness to be as egalitarian, as open, and as democratic as possible, that it sometimes causes us problems. But it's worth our support of pluralism and democracy to have these problems. We just need to have a better and stronger, more evident message. And we are not marketing ourselves.
Yeah, I might just add that Jewish Voice for Peace has been a strategic leader. It's very small. They claim they trumpet their Jewish identity because they are anti-Zionist. And they're used at a lot of these meetings, like at churches, some of the church meetings I've gone to say that being against Israel, being anti-Zionist, is not anti-Semitic. And the other side does protest this too much because they try so hard to prove that they're not anti-Semitic when there are so many elements of anti-Semitism in the BDS movement. And these anti-Israel, Max Blumenthal, or some of these other people who are anti-Zionist are profiled, are paid to go and speak at different venues to try to wipe away. And of course, this anti-Zionism, BDS, is fundamentally fits the criteria of the new anti-Semitism that Sharansky laid out with the 3 Ds: demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. It's a dangerous movement, and it warps values just like traditional anti-Semitism.
And what I object to most is not even the fact that they say they're Jewish, but that say that they're voices for peace. Because nothing they propose will lead us to the peace that Israel wants, the peace that Israel has given so much for, the peace that we all want to see for the next generation, for the children of Israel, for the Palestinian children. They should